Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
I would like to know if we could make sure to get the capital gains legislation to President Clinton before we give him the line item veto. I think you know what I mean. Also, can we force some kind of a coalition government on those crooks down in Mexico before they, drag off some more of our money?
Okay, thanks. Senator?
Well, let me answer the first. I think I said early on, maybe Ed wasn't tuned in, I think when we send any cap gains, the president ought to be in some kind of a package where he doesn't get just pick out capital gains. And I can understand why they went out the line item veto first, because he might that applied to tax bills, he could take out the cap gains and sign the rest of it. So
that's an important point, though. The line item veto applies to spending items and not to revenue items like the taxes.
So that wouldn't save him. So
let me ask you on foreign policy: should the Senate repeal the War Powers Act?
In fact, it's going to be one of the first 5 bills I introduce, called the Peace Powers Act. We think we ought to repeal the War Powers Act. And I say that as someone who reluctantly supported it back in the 70s. So we've got a whole host of things here that that's going to be S5. It's going to be one of the high visible bills that we're going to be introducing. I'll introduce with Senator Helms and Senator Thurmond and a number of other Republicans.
Okay. To Orlando, Florida, and Bruce. You're on the air, Bruce.
Senator Dole.
Yes.
I'm feeling very euphoric about the beginning of the 104th Congress. And I have a question. If and when the proposed tax cuts are passed, will they be retroactive?
I don't know. Well, I guess I'd probably say...
Like the tax...
Yeah, I know like the tax increases were. But if we make them retroactive, we've got to come up with more money. So it'll probably be discussed, but it'll probably be retroactive to some date, or maybe the date they're introduced or whatever. Normally that's what happens on tax cuts. We tried, as you know, last year unsuccessfully. Senator Kay Hutchinson of Texas led the charge to repeal the retroactive tax increases. In fact, there's still a court case pending on increase of estate taxes, and that hasn't been definitely resolved.
Okay. Rockford, Illinois. Billy.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I think that you should cut a lot of things before you start cutting the benefits to the poor and the needy. I think that there's just a whole kinds of ways that you can have before you get down to cutting the money to the people that absolutely need it the most.
Well, I don't disagree with that. In fact, I think that's why we have to become the example. Congress has to be the example. At least this is my view. Before we reach out and tell anybody you know, Billy, or anybody else, we're going to cut your programs, we're going to say, what have you done at Congress? Have you cut the staff? Have you cut some other things? Have you taken a look at the fat pension programs that members of Congress receive when they retire? So we've got to be in a position we look people in the eye and say, yes, we've addressed some of these concerns, and we're going to join in any sacrifice that's made.
Yeah, the other thing is, when you get into a debate about something like welfare, there's always a wrestling over what the facts are. And
right.
What's fascinating about welfare, the welfare budget in real dollars has tripled in the last 20 years. The amount of money going to welfare recipients has not changed at all, which means that 2 out of every $3 is basically going to caseworkers and not to the truly needy.
No doubt about it. And I think my view on welfare reform is we ought to listen to the governor of Illinois, like Jim Edgar and John Engler and Tommy Thompson in Wisconsin, John Engler in Michigan, George Voinovich in Ohio, Pete Wilson in California. I mean, these people work, and others, Bill Weld, Massachusetts, they're going to give us their ideas. In fact, the governor is going to give us a draft of welfare reform legislation on January 6th, which is this week. So we'll have a pretty good idea where the governors are coming from, and I think wherever we can, we ought to try to accommodate their wishes, because they deal with it at a grassroots level and on a daily basis.
Do you think that can you foresee a day when the Senate is going to pass a bill that basically would repeal federal welfare spending and return it all to the states?
That's the hope of Senator Kassebaum, my colleague from Kansas, who has that proposal. If we can come together, the governors, with that some kind of a program, my view, it can happen in the Senate if we just let go. And if you ask most governors, Democrats or Republicans, on welfare, what do they tell us? Get out of our way. Now, I think we ought to be prepared to get out of their way if they've got a good, solid program. And as you know, Tony, they've said if you can give us jurisdiction, send us block grants, we can take 25% less and still have a better program.
Yeah. You had arguably the most brilliant parliamentary year, well, at least in decades. Last year, dealing with the crime bill, with health care, and so on. I'm using this as a lead-in to John in Odessa, Texas, who wants to talk about the crime bill. John, thanks for calling.
Thank you.
John?
Yes, if we were to supply the Republicans with another majority in both houses at the next election and also add a president, what are the chances of getting this odious crime bill repealed, especially its gun control provisions?
Well, we're going to try to revise or repeal a lot of it. I'm not certain we have the votes on the gun provisions. But we've got, we tried to offer 10 amendments last year, and we were denied that up. One thing we were going to do, which was an idea that Senator Hatch and Don Nichols, Phil GRAMM, and others had last year, was if you use a gun in the commission of a crime, you get a mandatory minimum sentence. You go after the criminal instead of the gun. We're also going to strike about $5 billion in social spending, and we're going to try to block grant more money back to the states to give the states flexibility rather than the feds again.
Senator, one last quick question. There's a lot going on in Washington with the with the House and Senate versions of the contract, but you're a man with great patience, and I mean, this is something that's been a hallmark over the years. What do you see emerging as the key issues after the contract, leading into the 96 elections and beyond?
I think one thing, we better take a hard look at quotas. We better take a look at what's happening out in California and try to figure out some quota-free legislation. So you get a job and you can advance in your job based on your potential, not on anything else. That's going to be a big, big issue, in my view, coming down. Again, if we don't get capital gains, that's going to be a big, big issue. Immigration is going to be a big burning issue in 1996. And of course, we've got other things that are important, but they're not going to be the hot buttons like telecommunications and things of this. It's very important. It's the future of American technology. We hope to do that this year, again, working with the House, and in that case, I think working on a bipartisan basis.
Yeah, if you could come up with a quick slogan for Republicans to describe the majority for the next 20 years, what would it be?
Keep your word to the American people. Give America back to the people. That's my New Year's resolution.
Okay.
Give America back to the people.
Well, we hope you follow through. We'll keep our eyes on it. Senator Bob Dole, thank you so much.
WABC. That the current program is hurting the very people that we're supposed to be helping. Never in history have we taken so much money from people who are pulling the wagon and given so much to people that are riding in the wagon and made both groups worse off simultaneously. So I think we've got to throw out the current system, and I think we should adopt a certain set of principles and the reforms that flow from it. Number one, we ought to have a mandatory work requirement in the private sector of the economy. And if, in order to make it possible for people to find a job, any job, we ought to exempt them from the minimum wage and supplement their income. If they can only earn $2.50 or $3 an hour in gainful employment, getting real training and a real job, there's dignity in that work, and we can supplement their income, and we can cut welfare spending dramatically if we have a mandatory work requirement in the private sector of the economy.
When you say mandatory, what you're saying is they got to get their jobs in the private sector, not in the government.
And we exempt them from the minimum wage law, and then we go back and we supplement their income if they cannot earn a living wage, but they're working. They're doing the only thing that really brings dignity, and that is contributing. I think, secondly, that we have got to change the system to comply with a simple principle. The people who are riding in the wagon should not be better off than the people who are pulling the wagon. In Washington, D.C., a welfare recipient with one child that qualifies for the 4 major welfare programs can get benefits that have a pre-tax value of $21,000 a year. If they take a minimum wage job, they make $8,800 a year. We literally have millions of Americans working who are worse off than people who are receiving welfare. And it's no wonder that people won't get out of the wagon and help.
Now, when you're talking about making these changes, do you want welfare still to be run out of Washington, or do you establish these principles and then say, okay, states, go do it? Do you create, in other words, kind of a federal mandate for the way states handle welfare?
I would do it in a two-step process. I would reform the federal system, and it would include, just to touch on the other reforms, no more money for having additional children once you're on welfare. and dramatically changing the system in terms of incentives, reforming Medicaid with co-payments, then I would say to the states, this is what it costs to implement the federal system. If you can take this amount of money or less and do it better, you're granted a full waiver to do it. But we can't simply say to the states, here's the money, because the federal taxpayer is spending $179 billion a year on welfare programs this year. If we don't change the system, that's going to automatically grow to $280 billion in 5 years. We can't let that happen.
Okay, this gets us to a second thing. You're a guy who's famous for being a real budget hawk. You know, you're part of the, obviously, Graham, Redmond, Hollings. Where do you see, when you're talking about the Republican contracts, where you can get the money so-called, I hate to say to pay it, how are you going to make the budget cuts necessary to get the government down to size so that you balance the budget at the same time you're fulfilling the promises?
Well, first of all, I think the glue that will hold the contract for America together, and the essential ingredient in making that happen, is going to be a willingness to cut government spending. And I think the way to do it is to simply level with people. Look, on our effort to cut middle-class taxes by raising the dependent exemption for children so that working families can keep more of what they earn and spend it on their own children, what we're saying is this. Look, for 40 years, government has taken more and more of your income, and it has spent that money for you to help you and help your children. We believe government has done a bad job. So what we're going to do in the Department of Education, in HUD and independent agencies, in the Energy Department, and the Labor Department, is go back and cut the very programs that are supposed to be helping you, and then we're going to let you keep your own income to spend it on your own family, your own children, and your own future. If you believe government spends your money better than you can spend it, you're going to be worse off. Of course, you're in a very select minority. But if you believe that you can spend your own money better than the government can spend it for you, you got to believe that two things are going to happen. One, you're going to be freer. And two, you're going to be better off because you know your needs, you know your children, and you love your children more than the government does.
Okay, now, you've just said you're going to make these cuts. How much is that going to total up to? Have you done a calculation on that?
Well, it depends on how you do it. I believe over the next 5 years, we can save between $50 and $75 billion.
Now, are we talking real savings? Are we talking current against the current services?
Oh, we're talking savings related to the way government keeps its books.
So current versus current services.
Yeah, we're talking about savings relative to what we would spend. Now, if you were going to apply what I call the Dickey Flat test.
That's right.
And that is take a hard-working person, look how hard they work for their money, and then ask yourself a question, are the benefits to be derived from spending money on this program worth taking the money away from my printer in Mahia, Dickey Flat? You could eliminate a third of the government.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to do is to get the ball rolling, and I think the trick the first year for us is don't bite off so much we can't swallow it, but be ambitious, be bold, and try to do enough so that people believe that the election actually worked, that things are different, and then build on it. We're not going to reverse the result of 12 or 15 bad elections with one good election.
Yeah. I'm speaking with Senator Phil Gramm. I'm Tony Snow. You're listening to the Rush Limbaugh radio program, and the phone number is 1-800-282-2882. One of the other key issues when it comes to values has been civil rights. And for a long time, Republicans have been back on their heels, afraid really to make any kinds of arguments about civil rights. In the state of California right now, there's a lot of talk about an amendment to the state constitution that basically says the state will not permit businesses to advance or deny people promotion or any kinds of benefits on the basis of race, class, creed, and so on. What's your take? Where should Republicans be going on handling the issue of race?
I think Republicans have got to take a very clear position, and that position is we're for equal opportunity for everybody, but we're not for special privilege for anybody. If America stands for any principle, it's the principle of equality of opportunity, not equality of result. It's not our skin or our blood, it's our hearts that make us Americans. And if we get into this situation where the outcome is guaranteed based on your ethnic group, where people are judged by anything other than their character, their God-given ability, and how hard they work, we are creating very real problems for ourselves. And there's no doubt about the fact that in the last 20 or 30 years, America has increasingly bought into the notion of quotas, preferences, and set-asides.
Right.
And I think they need to be eliminated. We need a system based on merit and merit alone.
How do you attack then? You've got an administration right now. The Civil Rights Division in the Justice Department has been very aggressive, basically on promoting quotas. The Housing Department, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, perhaps even more so. Now you've got control of the Senate, Republicans. What are you going to do about administration agencies that are doing the sorts of things that you say you want to repeal?
Well, I think that we've got to go through and take each one of them on. And what we want to be absolutely certain of is that people are judged based on their individual merits. And I think you have the initiative in California. I think you're going to see similar initiatives in Congress. And basically, if you mean by affirmative action going out and trying to assure that everybody in this country has an opportunity, I'm for it. But I believe that once you give people the opportunity, you've got to then let people succeed or fail based on their merits. And if you look at the executive orders of the federal government, if you look at our appropriations bills, if you look at the legislative structure of the country, increasingly for the last 30 years, we have built quotas, preferences, and set-asides into the system. People are not judged equally in almost any element of American life today.
So it's time to tear them out.
It's time to tear them out and go back to what Martin Luther King wanted.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've got 15 minutes to take a crack at Senator Phil Gramm. We'll be back right after these messages on the Rush Limbaugh radio program. We're on the Rush Limbaugh program. Welcome.
Hi, Tony. Hi, Senator Gramm.
Hi, Linda.
I'm really concerned, Senator Gramm, about the Republican Party right now. I agree wholeheartedly with all of the Contract with America points. However, right now in our county, we've had a real split in our Republican Party over the moral issues. And I'm just wondering how you think this issue can be resolved.
When you say moral issues, are you talking about abortion in particular, or what are the key issues?
I'm from Oregon, so we're dealing with abortion and the gay rights issue, as well as the right to die issue.
Yeah, the assisted suicide.
Yes, and what has happened here is that we've had some people that are friends of mine who've basically taken over the Republican Party, and it's happened in several counties in Oregon. And I'm pro-life, and I'm very interested in the moral issues, but I'm really afraid of what is going to happen to the Republican Party as a result of this.
Okay, Senator, should the Republicans steer clear of these issues, especially while they're dealing with the contract?
Well, obviously, I think we have a contract with America and Congress. We're going to fulfill that contract, and we're not going to put any issues in front of the contract. Now, in terms of the individual party, I think we need to look back at Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan united Republicans, even though Republicans have various views on everything from abortion to whatever issues you're talking about that relate to what are generally called social issues. And the way Ronald Reagan did it is that he had a clear vision of producing peace through strength and prosperity through limited government free enterprise. And even though the president was strongly pro-life, he was able to present such a clear vision that it united people who differed on many other issues. People feel strongly about these issues. We can't wish them away. They're important issues. What we've got to do is have a unifying vision that will allow people who differ on many of these issues to unite together and be Republicans and to help us change America.
Should the GOP steer clear of abortion and gay rights in the platform in '96?
I don't think that the GOP is not an individual. It's literally millions of people. I think there are many people who would like any controversy concerning these issues to disappear, but they're not going to disappear. These are important issues, and what we've got to do is recognize the fact that there are differences. And what we've got to do is have a vision that is so powerful on things that we jointly care about that people can say, I don't agree with everybody in the party on abortion, but I do agree on welfare reform. I do agree on limited government. I do agree on equality of opportunity by eliminating quotas, preferences, and set-asides.
Okay.
And so we're going to set these differences behind us.
Okay.
I can't. Why don't you just whisper it to me, just between you and me? She doesn't. Well, that's the only thing he ever said about her.
Well,
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Let me ask you, when are you going to do your next interview with Connie Chung?
It may be a while. Those things just happen. I just think, she ought to apologize to my mom and to Mrs. Clinton, and then we'll go on with life.
Well, one of the other things is, obviously, there's a little bit of a discussion today about book royalties. Now, one of the rumors going around town is that you explained a $4.5 million royalty, which was bigger than the Pope and Rush, by arguing that...
No, it's less than the Pope.
It's less than the Pope. Well, okay, it just spoiled my joke. I was going to make an infallibility joke. Why don't we... I want to get to sort of the big picture about what Republicans are going to be doing. Today, obviously, you're going to get significant reform in the House of Representatives.
Well, I think that we're doing a couple things, Tony. First of all, I think today we're showing people that we actually keep our word, that we are a new breed of political leaders who actually tell you before the election what they're going to do and then actually do what they told you they would do. So from that standpoint, I think just the act of passing the 9 reforms today will tell people that we're different. I also think we're the most work-oriented House probably in modern times. So we're starting off with the longest opening day in history. And I think as you watch the contract with America over the next few weeks, we're doing things the American people want. We're going to be working on welfare reform. We're going to be working on litigation reform. We're going to be passing a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. We're going to be working on a line item veto on an effective enforceable death penalty. These are all issues that the American people by overwhelming numbers favor, and I think that watching a Republican Congress actually trying to do what the American people want is going to be such a big change from the last few years of watching Democratic Congresses bottle up the American people's desires, that I think it's going to make a pretty big difference.
Now, I gather from, I just listened to your press conference, I gather the honeymoon between you and the Democrats was pretty short-lived.
Well, I think it's very disappointing. I mean, we've tried to accommodate and work with them and on a number of issues, and they have a chance today. The contract was out there out in the open. They attacked it. It passed. They were defeated in the election. You'd think after 40 years in power that they would stop and try to analyze what might have gone wrong. Instead, you have the same kind of leadership doing the same dumb things they did before they were repudiated. I mean, I think for them to offer today a clearly partisan, narrowly drawn motion is just very self-destructive. It's their prerogative, but it's not a serious effort. And I'm disappointed, frankly. I thought they had an opportunity to listen to the American people after the election and maybe to come in and actually try to cooperate with us and actually try to improve things. And instead, I think the hardline members of their caucus have taken control and are forcing their leadership to do some things that probably wouldn't do on its own.
Yeah, now when we're talking about the motion they're doing, this is about basically an attack on you and book royalties.
Well, it's going to be a couple things. It's going to be, and frankly, we don't know, because unlike our contract, which has been out there since September 27th, we still don't have the written language of what they're going to do. So I don't know what they're going to do. I'm told that they were still meeting this morning to try to decide. So you have, on the one hand, a Republican Party that's been telling you since September what it's going to do. On the other hand, you have a Democratic leadership that, as late as this morning, was still trying to figure out exactly what their proposal was going to be. But my impression is that it's going to be basically designed to embarrass Republicans in a way which is pretty hypocritical, I think. They're not going to say anything in there about Al Gore's $1 million royalties. They're not going to say anything in there about Teddy Kennedy and Jay Rockefeller's unearned income. So what they're saying is if you have intellectual property rights and you're a Republican and you're in the House, they've got an idea. But if you're the vice president of their party that their party nominated, or if you are if you manage to inherit your millions, they don't want to deal with you. I just think the average American is going to look at that and say, that is everything we voted against. It's the narrowest, cheapest, and dumbest kind of politics.
Okay, I hear your buzzer buzzing. Do you have to go, or can
I know
you stick with us
we've got about 6 or 7 more minutes.
Okay, let me run through a couple of quick things then. In terms of the big picture, one of the big discussions among Republicans right now is, what do you do in terms of the balance of taxes and spending? And I gather that right now, the consensus is that you need to cut spending first and then worry about taxes.
Well, but I think you need to cut spending right now, and you need to maybe put some spending cuts into the tax cuts. But I think that we want to do both pretty quickly. I think we vote for social policy, want to send the signal that we are pro-child and pro-family. I think for economic policy, we want to send the signal we're in favor of investment and creating better jobs, and we favor those kind of steps. I do not think that we want to be in a position that we are, delaying everything for 6 months or a year. So yeah, I want us to move in parallel tracks right now, simultaneously.
If Bill Clinton sees the spending cuts and vetoes them, does it mean that Republicans will not be pushing for the tax cuts this year?
Not in my judgment. I mean, I think we may have to end up packaging them together.
Okay.
And force them to face them together. But we're not, again, since we control the House and the Senate, we now have a creativity we didn't have. And I think Senator Dole and I met yesterday, had a very good meeting. We did 2 TV news shows this morning together and had a chance to chat in between. We are really working overtime to make sure that we're together as a team and that the House and Senate Republicans are not going to let either the news media or the administration drive a wedge between us.
There's a rumor also that some Democrats want to play off the pledge by saying, okay, we're applying all these laws to ourselves, or actually the measures you're going to take today. I want immediate compliance with OSHA standards. I want, better ventilation, better lighting.
They can be deliberately and childishly stupid if they want to be. Well, the fact is, Tony, every adult American is tired of petty politics and wants an adult approach. And if that means that the Congress is going to take a while to get into OSHA compliance, that's good, but at least we ought to know up front, out in the open, in public, do we have OSHA problems? And frankly, if they're the dumb kind of OSHA problems, where you have some OSHA inspector who doesn't have a clue what they're doing, and they come in and say, your fire extinguisher is 2 inches too close to the floor, then the Congress, I believe, is going to start changing the laws that apply to small business and family farms, and and they're going to say, gee, maybe we need common sense, because what this has done for the last 25 years is it has allowed Congress to pass dumb laws and then have bureaucrats pass even dumber regulations, and nobody in Congress had to bear the consequence of their legislation, which was the opposite of what James Madison promised in the Federalist Papers.
Okay, I want to do 2 quick questions and then also get in a quick phone call from one of our listeners. So, do you think that, can you use Congress actually as a demonstration project for why you ought to get rid of regulations and actually use that to dramatize the need to get rid of regulations?
Absolutely. I believe as people start to look at the regulatory impact that they're going to start saying, this just doesn't make sense. I believe common sense beats theoretical indignation. And I think we just have to over and over argue for common sense, and the vast majority of Americans will be with us.
Second question. You come from a military family. You're also somebody who's notoriously fascinated with technology. Bill Clinton says that he will veto any Star Wars, that is Strategic Defense Initiative, missile defense package that gets handed to him. What is the quick case that Republicans need to make to the American public to explain why in the post-Cold War world we need missile defense?
Well, of course, my dad has served in the Army for 27 years, is here today, and I think what he would say at a practical level is somewhere on the planet in the next 20 or 30 years is going to be an outlaw nation with a dictatorship that's going to have 1 or 2 or 3 nuclear weapons. If there is no American defense system to stop 1 or 2 or 3 missiles, they literally can say to us, do what we want, or we eliminate New York or Chicago or Atlanta. On the other hand, if we have a limited, realistic, anti-terrorist missile defense system, we're able to say to them, we'll shoot it down. We have the technology to do it. I think it is terrible to suggest that we ought to put at risk an American city, all those lives, because of some theoretical model of nuclear arms control that is now 20 years out of date and that was designed for a Soviet Union that disappeared.
Okay, 1-800-282-2882 is our phone number, and Brad in Ruston, Louisiana, you're on the air with the Speaker of the House.
Yes, Mr. Gingrich, I have a question. Assuming the balanced budget amendment gets passed, how's it going to be effective, say, 20 to 30 years from now against Democrats trying to overspend?
Well, that was asked the other day, and it was an interesting question. I'm not a lawyer by background, I'm a historian. But I think the first thing that you've got to look at is that in states that have balanced budget requirements, it seems to actually work. They are actually enforced by the state Supreme Court. When you talk to governors, though, and you talk to mayors, they'll tell you that it's a very powerful, very effective limitation on spending. So I'm not sure legally whether that means the Supreme Court would order the Congress to cut spending or how it would be and what the enforcement mechanism would be. But my sense is, and it's a question we'll certainly make sure that Congressman Henry Hyde gets answered when they have the Judiciary Committee hearings on the topic in the next week or two. But I believe that virtually every governor will tell you that a balanced budget requirement in their state constitution is very effective and requires them to really focus on budget discipline.
One of the things, we've talked a little bit about run-ins with the media. You actually are a participant in the new media. Now, talk radio clearly is part of it. Describe quickly the importance of, cable television,
talk
I don't
radio,
think,
and all these. To be honest, Tony, and of course you know this from your own background in the White House, I do not believe that without C-SPAN, without the talk radio programs, without all the various alternative media, I don't think we'd have won. I think that the classic elite media would have distorted our message in a way that we couldn't have gotten out. But what I find happening, and this is not pro-Republican or pro-Democrat, I find that there's a giant national dialogue now that goes on. Rush Limbaugh is probably the preeminent example because more millions listen to Rush than anybody else. People not just listen to it, but then they talk to their friends and their neighbors, and there's this ongoing dialogue, and that talk radio and C-SPAN have literally changed for millions of activists the way they get information and the way they think about things. What we're going to do in the Congress, we're going to have a once-a-month breakfast or lunch with talk radio hosts that I will be part of. We're going to have an opportunity for talk radio starting today to be out in the Capitol for the first time. We're going to expand the television access to meetings, and we're going to make meetings open that have been closed so that people can see their Congress. And we're going to put legislation and conference reports and amendments on internet so that anybody who wants to can get direct access and has the same opportunity to learn things as the wealthiest lobbyist in Washington. I think by making this an information-rich, open Congress that everybody has access to, we're going to change a lot. And I think that that was not technically doable 30 years ago.